Also, Alessandra, do you have questions? Okay, so we'll do this.
Okay, so, dear Margarita, enjoy your classes every week. Thank you. I was reading a book and I stumbled upon this phrase. By nature, man and woman are antagonistic, yet complementary in their behavior and are thus obliged to play tag permanently. What do you understand by play tag?
Okay, the student was reading a book. This is a question that Alessandro just sent me, just read to me because I don't have it on paper. In the passage of the book, it said that men and women are necessarily antagonistic and complementary, and therefore they must play tag all the time. Was it all the time, Alessandra?
Permanently.
Permanently. Play tag permanently. And the question is, what does the phrase play tag mean? Children play tag. It's a game. When you are playing tag, one person is it, and they have to try to tag someone. And when they tag someone, well, then they turn and run, and that person chases. So this game implies a reciprocal chase. First, I pursue you. If I catch you, then I turn and run away in the other direction, and you are chasing me. So it is suggesting that men and women are perpetually alternating between pursuit and flight, and if they ever catch the other, the role reverses. And there's never a good mesh. That's what it's suggesting.
What's tag?
Tag is the name of the game, and it is a verb meaning to touch and to transfer some role or power. It has other meanings too, but in this case, it's the name of the game and it is the verb. It means to chase someone and then touch them.
Okay.
Other questions?
Okay, another question. Actually, it's not a question, it's a suggestion.
Do you want to read it and have me repeat as you?
Yeah.
Okay, Alessandro's going to read and then phrase by phrase, and I'll send it on to you. This is a comment by a student.
Okay. Hi, Margarita. I've just watched the 14th class, and one student asked a question about infinitives and gerunds.
The student says hello, and then he says he just watched the 14th class, and somebody asked a question about gerunds and infinitives.
And then it's a she. She's saying that I am studying for the TOEFL test, and because of that, I am doing a lot of grammar exercises.
The student is studying to take the TOEFL test, and as a result, she is having to do a lot of grammar exercises.
So she's saying the last week before the 14th class, she did a lot of exercise about infinitives and gerunds, and she recommends a link for everyone who wants to, do more exercise and learn something more about infinitive and gerund.
Okay, so this student has been doing a lot of exercises about gerunds and infinitives, and she's going to give us a link that gives resources for any of you who may need some extra help in that topic. Let me write down the topic in case you're not understanding me well. So we're going to get a link about gerunds and infinitives. And what's the link?
Link is englishpage.com.
englishpage.com
/gerunds
index
dot htm.
Is that it? Okay, so if you need some extra help on gerunds and infinitives, here is a link for you. Thank you very much to the student who sent that. Okay, that's all the questions. Now, did we ever answer that question about articles that I was supposed to answer last week? An $800 million deficit, a $1.3 billion deficit. I think we did not. Because I was going to answer it and then we didn't have class last week. Okay, last week I was sick and so we didn't have class, and there was a question I was going to answer. So let me give you this answer right now. A student was reading some piece of literature, and it had two phrases. One of them talked about an $800 million deficit. And the other one talked about a $1.3 billion surplus. Now the question the student had was, why is there an N here and not here? Because what follows is exactly the same. But the truth is, when you are speaking, it is not the same. And 800 million. 8 begins with the sound A, long A sound. 8. Whereas a 1.3 billion starts with the sound W. A 1.3 billion. Now, this is not the way they are spelled. The word 800 million is spelled E-I-G-H. And this is also it's a vowel sound, A. This is spelled O-N-E. But it's pronounced one, which for us is a consonant. And if you have a consonant sound, you do not put an N. You just have a $1.3 billion deficit. But if you have a vowel sound following, you need the N. An $800 million deficit. The other thing I'll point out here is when you see this symbol, then you put the word dollar in after the number. $800 million deficit. A $1.3 billion surplus. So this little symbol, it comes out in front of the numbers, but you don't pronounce it until you have finished giving all of the number words, and then you put dollar in. So when you're writing it, you don't write the word dollar at all if you use this symbol. So I could write an $800 million deficit without that, and I read it, an $800 million deficit. Or I could just as correctly write an $800 million deficit. So I don't have to use this symbol. I can write the word dollar, or I use the symbol, but not both. Okay, it's a choice. And if you are going to use the symbol, you must use numbers, digits. If you're going to spell it out, you do not use the symbol. And they're read, in words, they are read the same. You read them exactly the same. But they can be written two different ways. Okay? If you have any other little questions about some aspect of grammar or something you've been reading, you can send them right now. Otherwise, we're going to get on to the book. Okay. Let's see. We were on page I believe we were on page 30. Maybe 29. Actually, 29. And we were in the middle of a philosophical problem. The problem is that Bertrand Russell and Andreski and most of the philosophers today admit a distinction between facts and values. And Levis does not appreciate this distinction. And he is making a case. He is attempting to show that Andreski is not a clear thinker when it comes to this. He is attempting to make explicit the problems in Andreski's thought. So let us read. Actually, I usually like to back up a paragraph or two so that we can get the context. We are still in the portion of the book where Levis is trying to justify his immodest proposal, which is on page 28. The immodest proposal. So we are still in the argument concerning the immodest proposal, which is that English and other disciplines should be co-present in the university, but that the disciplines will inform one another, but no one discipline will take authority over the other. English will not be submitted to the authoritative pronouncements of philosophy, nor will philosophy be submitted to authoritative pronouncements by English. All the disciplines should be co-present and independent. This is the immodest proposal. It is immodest because Levis is suggesting that English students are just as philosophically capable as philosophy students, and that the English department has just as much ability to speak with philosophic authority on their topic as the philosophy department has to speak on English topics. So this immodest proposal is what Levis is arguing about in the general context of where we are. I will begin reading at the bottom of page 28, the last paragraph, beginning with the words, "the positive criterion." Okay. Well, I'll leave that up for now. And we will begin our study in the first full paragraph on page 29. The positive criterion, or standard, Andreski appeals to here is represented by the word dispassionately, and the limiting weakness of his thought appears in the way he sets about intimating what he means by the term. He doesn't, as a matter of fact, positively define its force. He merely adduces, to set over and against it, various modes of treatment that we are to see as coming under the phrase emotional manipulation. Manipulation, of course, is pejorative, and so is emotional here, where it is used very much in the spirit of Professor Plum's adverb in this sentence from The Death of the Past. Quote, "Another refugee in a never land of the past is F.R. Levis, whose picture of 19th century England is totally unrealistic, as it must be emotionally satisfying. But imbuing people with appropriate sentiments and instilling into them beliefs about existing circumstances and causal relations between them, in order to influence their behavior, don't necessarily answer to Andreski's pejorative intention. Everything depends on the mode, purpose, and spirit of the influencing. He is thinking of influence where these are to be condemned. His description, in the passage I quote earlier, of his own expository and critical work as exhortation makes it plain that he aims at exerting influence, and that a sense of the need to exert it is a main element in the drive behind his writing. It is difficult, he says, to envisage how any standards whatsoever can contrive to exist without some people taking upon themselves the task of affirming them and preaching against vice." Moving on. This avowal seems to me a highly valuable testimony. Again, though I doubt whether Andreski himself realizes to the full its value and importance. Are the standards he speaks of, any standards whatsoever, merely the standards necessary to the achievement of objectivity as he conceives or misconceives it? That is not, as a matter of his intention, plain. But the intention itself could have no better than a very partial clarity without a better understanding of the nature of standards than we can credit Andreski with. The issues are fundamental, and in relation to the status of English as a discipline of thought, of the utmost importance. Okay, I believe we did study that paragraph, but I want to do a brief recap before we move on. Andreski says that it's hard to imagine that any standards whatsoever will exist in the absence of somebody taking it upon himself to preach them and to preach against vice. So vice is the opposite of standards. And we spoke in several classes ago that standards in this sense seem to be part of the religious side of the whiteboard, part of the values side of the whiteboard, not part of the objectivity side. Standards refer to questions of value. And the fact that Andreski believes a person must preach these standards and preach against vice indicates that the standards are not the kind of thing that are immediately obvious from the facts of nature. It almost suggests a need for, quote, revelation. A standard that comes from outside the system and provides the information needed to make a judgment or a choice. So remember, we have facts, and we have values, and in the system we have no way of determining which values are valuable. So in other words, no way of defining what standards anyone is shooting for, what standards we are trying to achieve. There is no mechanism for defining values, what is good and what is bad. You need a third thing outside the system to provide that kind of information. Okay. When Levis says, this avowal seems to me a highly valuable testimony, though I doubt whether Andreski himself realizes to the full its value and importance. You must ask yourself, what is the reference for the word avowal? This avowal seems to me a highly valuable testimony. What does avowal mean here? This avowal. Avowal, I think it's AL. sorry. The avowal is Andreski's avowal that standards are required and will not be there without someone preaching them. Now, why is the avowal such a valuable testimony? First, why is it valuable? First, the truth value. Levis agrees. Without someone preaching standards and preaching against vice, the bar will sink. That is true. So it's a valuable testimony on the surface for its truth value. But also, the fact that Andreski refers to standards means he believes in them. He believes standards actually exist. He perhaps doesn't realize it, but he is revealing that he believes in the objective nature of standards, that they exist, that they're innately and intrinsically valuable. So, for our purposes, his statement is a valuable testimony, not just because it's true, but also because it proves that he knows it's true, even though he explicitly states his assumption that facts and values, that only facts are objective and not values. So it shows his inconsistency. Okay, now Levis also asks the question, what are the standards Andreski is referring to? So next question is, what are we talking about? What standards? What standards is Andreski thinking of? Are they merely, which means only and nothing more, merely the standards necessary to achieve objectivity? In other words, is objectivity the highest value in and of itself? And Levis says, no. It does not appear that to Andreski he is simply merely trying to get people to adhere to the value of objectivity. It is not just that. But what it is can have only a very partial clarity without Andreski having clearer thought and clearer expression of what he's talking about. Excuse me. However, the issues are fundamental. The fundamental issue is, what are the standards and what is the nature of them? And it's necessary to English as a discipline of thought, of the utmost importance. Okay, moving on to the next paragraph. Bottom of page 29. Andreski, who rests on his assumptions as not seriously questionable, invokes philosophic authority for them and finds it in Bertrand Russell. Now, Russell's offer to justify the antithesis, statement of fact and statement of value, is what Marjorie Green making a major use of it in establishing her own very different position, criticizes in Chapter 6, Facts and Values, of the knower and the known. That is a book which I incite literary students to use as a main recourse for the acquiring of that knowledge of the development of philosophical thought from Descartes to Polanyi, which is essential to their thinking. Of course, not only in the prescription itself, but in that way of intimating the kind of need it serves, my immodest presumption is exemplified. It is actually inescapable. There is no reason at all for supposing that if one consulted professional authority in the proper academic department, there would be a high probability of the offered prescription being usable. In default of the rare miracle, the kind of need would simply not be understood. This is not to imply that, two real disciplines being co-present, mutual awareness would not be generated, with consequent profit for both and for the university's function as a creative center of civilization. Let's go back to the start. Andruski, who rests on his assumptions as not seriously questionable. Rest on. It means to rely on. If you're resting on a bed, you trust it. You don't even think of it. It is an assumption. He rests on his assumption very comfortably because he does not believe they can be challenged. His assumptions will not fall to the ground when he lays down on them. So he rests on his assumptions as not seriously questionable. Not questionable by serious people. No serious questions can be raised. And his assumptions he himself doesn't seem to examine carefully. So, Andruski, who is resting on his assumptions very comfortably as not questionable, invokes philosophic authority for them. So Andruski mentions to the reader that Bertrand Russell supports these assumptions about the distinction between fact and value. Okay? So, he invokes philosophic authority and finds it in Bertrand Russell. So, his emotion is that he is not worried about the strength or truth value of his assumptions, but he does give some support in the work by alluding to the work of Bertrand Russell. Now, Russell's offer to justify the antithesis, statement of fact and statement of value, is what Marjorie Green, making a major use of it in establishing her own very different position, criticizes in Chapter 6, Facts and Values of the Knower and the Known. This is a very long sentence, but not complicated or difficult. Let's make sure we understand it. Okay. Russell's offer criticizes. Now, Russell's offer to justify the antithesis is what Marjorie Green criticizes. Okay, so the core of the sentence is that Marjorie Green criticizes Russell's offer. Marjorie Green she really is the subject of this, criticizes she's criticizing Russell, but she's not really criticizing him. She's criticizing something very specific, his offer to justify the antithesis. So, I'm going to write his offer realizing we have to unpack that. Marjorie Green criticizes Russell's offer to justify the antithesis, fact and value, in her chapter, Facts and Values. Marjorie Green criticizes Russell in chapter 6 of her book. Her book. Okay, so that's the core. The core is Marjorie Green criticizes this offer in chapter 6. Now, there's lots more information. Chapter 6 of what? Chapter 6 of a book called, which I actually have the book here. The book is called The Knower and the Known by Marjorie Green. And her chapter 6 is called Facts and Values. This book is a history of philosophy from Descartes to Polanyi, and Marjorie Green is a very clear-thinking, logical, sharp philosophic writer. She's a philosopher. From a contemporary of Levis, I believe. Okay, so that's all our extra information here. But there is something else. It said, Marjorie Green making a major use of it in establishing her own very different position. Okay, so that whole clause points out that Marjorie Green makes a major use of Bertrand Russell's offer to justify this antithesis, statement of value. All right, that is what she uses to make her very different case. She does not agree with Bertrand Russell, but she takes his arguments and uses them to make the case that he's misguided, that he's all washed up and confused in his mind. Okay? So, Marjorie Green making a major use of Bertrand Russell's offer, his ideas, to establish her own very different position. A position is an argument of what she believes is true. Okay? And then finally, Bertrand Russell's offer to justify the antithesis, statement of fact, statement of value. Justify means prove it. Not prove it, but make it clear and persuade the reader that it is true. Justify the antithesis. I know you know what that means. The separation between statement of fact statement of value. Now you know that Olavo does not believe there is an antithesis between statement of fact, statement of value at all. Olavo believes that, I have it written down what he believes. Okay, Olavo believes that ideas are not substance, they are acts. And that when we perceive a fact, at the same moment we perceive its value. We put a value judgment on the facts that we perceive, and it is simultaneous. It comes at the same moment. You cannot separate them. So Olavo more or less believes in a union of fact and value. A synthesis, not an antithesis. So, but Bertrand Russell is justifying the antithesis. Okay, so let's read the whole sentence again. Understanding that the core is that Marjorie Green is criticizing Russell's offer to justify this in this chapter of her book while she is making a very different case than Russell. Okay, I'll reread the sentence. Now, Russell's offer to justify the antithesis, statement of fact and statement of value, is what Marjorie Green, making a major use of it in establishing her own very different position, criticizes in Chapter 6, Facts and Values of the Knower and the Known. Got it? That is a book, this one, The Knower and the Known. That is a book which I incite literary students to use as a main recourse for the acquiring of that knowledge of the development of philosophic thought from Descartes to Polanyi, which is essential to their thinking. Okay? So, he incites literary students, he gets them to read it and to use it as a main recourse. In other words, they need something, they turn to this book primarily. It's their first resource for acquiring the knowledge of the development of philosophic thought from Descartes to Polanyi, which is essential to their thinking. See, Levis is interested in the student's ability to think, not just their knowledge of philosophical history. He doesn't just want them to be able to say, well, Descartes said this, Kant said that, so-and-so Russell said this, Polanyi said that. It's not about learning in that sense. It's about growing in a person's understanding of the world and reality. And so you need to understand the development of philosophic thought in order to be able to think in the highest way yourself. That's what Levis is all about. Okay? And he knows the students need to walk the philosophical path as they themselves grow and as they study language, study English. Okay. Of course, not only in the prescription itself, but in that way of intimating the kind of need it serves, my immodest presumption is exemplified. Okay, we need to know what the pronouns refer to. Of course, not only in the prescription itself. What prescription? What's he talking about? I think the prescription is going back to the idea that the disciplines must be co-present in the university, and that English should be a liaison center, and that English should communicate with the other disciplines, but not be submitted to the authority of the other disciplines. I believe that is the prescription for the co-present nature of the disciplines in a university. Okay. Of course, not only in the prescription itself, but in that way of intimating the kind of need it serves. So we could reread and see what kind of need it serves. We could think, remember the diagram of all the disciplines with English at the center, having all of the disciplines available enables the English student to develop in all areas, understanding the complexities of the vocabulary and language and ideas of all of the disciplines simultaneously. Okay? My immodest presumption, that being that philosophy does not trump English, and science does not trump English. Sociology does not trump English. Trump means trump English. philosophy does not trump English. Trump, when we are playing cards, sometimes we have hearts, diamonds, spades, clubs. Maybe clubs is trump. And if someone has a club, a two of clubs will trump a king of anything else, because trump goes above. Well, we don't want philosophy to trump English, or any other discipline to trump English. Okay, that's the immodest presumption. Okay, so, of course, not only in the prescription itself, but in the way of intimating the kind of need it serves, my immodest presumption is exemplified. Okay, so he wants to show what his idea for the university should be. It is actually inescapable. What does the it refer to? Let's read the rest of the sentence first. It is actually inescapable. There is no reason at all for supposing that if one consulted professional authority in the proper academic department, there would be a high probability of the offered prescriptions being usable. In default of the rare miracle, the kind of need would simply not be understood. Okay, it is actually inescapable. I believe that it refers to the immodest presumption, the immodest proposal that English must be free to define its own terms and to pursue its own philosophical undergirding without having to kowtow to the philosophy department or the sociology department or the science or mathematics or anyone else. Okay, that's what the it refers to. And the need of English to be free is inescapable. The need is inescapable. There is no reason at all for supposing that if one consulted professional authority in the proper academic department, there would be a high probability of the offered prescription being usable. So, it is inescapable, the need of English to be free. Because if some English student went to the philosophy department for a judgment on some question of philosophy, the answer given would not be helpful. And the very heart of the question might not even be understood. That's what Levis is saying. And when he says, if one consulted professional authority, he is indicating that English is not free, English is subordinated to the other disciplines. The other discipline has authority. So if one consulted professional authority, there would be a high probability. There is no reason to suppose that there would be a high probability of the prescription being usable. No reason to expect a good answer. So, a good answer will not come. It is useless. So, all of this supports the idea that it is inescapable. English's need to be free and autonomous is inescapable. The immodest proposal that English be free is inescapable. There is no way that authority in another discipline will be helpful to English. in default of the rare miracle, the kind of need would simply not be understood. So I think it's saying English has a philosophy all of its own. And we just don't go to the philosophy department and ask them to dictate to us. In default of the rare miracle. In default means if it doesn't happen. So if the rare miracle does not occur, rare almost never happens. Miracle means it's never going to happen. So you have lots of negatives there. It will never happen. So in default of the rare miracle, the kind of need would simply not be understood. So philosophy won't understand. This is not to imply that two real disciplines being co-present, mutual awareness would not be generated, with consequent profit for both and for the university's function as a creative center of civilization. This is not to imply this is not to imply two real disciplines being co-present, mutual awareness would not be generated. Notice we have not and not, which is double negative. In English, they cancel and make a positive. We do not use a double negative to emphasize negative, which I believe in the Romance languages you do. Rather, they cancel each other out, making it a positive. So, what this means is, this implies that mutual awareness will be generated. Okay, that's the fundamental meaning, is positive. So when he says this is not to imply that mutual awareness would not be generated, he's saying, of course mutual awareness will be generated. I don't mean to imply that it will not. I mean to imply that it will be generated. Okay, I don't mean to imply that mutual awareness will not be generated, with consequent profit for both. So there will be consequent profit. And for the university's function as a creative center of civilization. And then what goes in here? It's the condition. Two disciplines being co-present. Wait, where is it? Two real disciplines being co-present is the condition. So this implies that mutual awareness will be generated to the profit of both and the university itself as a creative center of civilization. So he is still talking about what he introduced on page the bit about liaison center. I can't see it right at the moment, but he's basically wrapping up and going back to that idea that English is the liaison center and all the disciplines are out around it. And that's the best. That's on page 28. I see it here. And then he goes into his immodest proposal that English is at the center and is independent. So what Levis wants is a good university, which is a creative center for real learning and the development of an educated public. Okay, and a creative center, which goes along with Levis's theme of the living principle. The living principle is about creativity, not just about amassing knowledge, facts. Okay. Okay, next paragraph. Marjorie Green's chapter, which so clearly bears in a fundamental way on English, is sufficiently self-contained so that discussion of the issues it raises being in question, one could reasonably send one's students directly to it. It could, in fact, be read as an opening into the book. It seems to me that no philosopher could seriously disturb my ad hoc judgment that the book is a very fine piece of work, wide-ranging, pregnant, and closely knit, unsurpassable, in fact, for my purpose. To offer to summarize even the given chapter would be absurd. I shall merely make such use of the book here as may facilitate the argument I am committed to. I'll stop right there and move on. So, Marjorie Green's chapter, which so clearly bears in a fundamental way on English, is sufficiently self-contained so that discussion of the issues it raises being in question, one could reasonably send one's students directly to it. It could be read as an opening into the book. Okay, the main point is that Marjorie Green's chapter, that you could send your students directly to it, and that it could be read as an opening to the book. And then it gives additional information about the chapter. First of all, and it's chapter 6, Facts and Values, remember. First, it clearly bears in a fundamental way on English. What does it mean to bear on English? It means it gives information directly and crucially relevant. It is part of the argument that we are making. It gives important, detailed information about English as a discipline of thought. When he uses his quotation marks around English, he is talking about English as a discipline of thought. And her chapter also speaks to the issue of disciplined thought and the use of language, the correct use of, actually, it's more about the correct use of thought, if I'm not mistaken. I've read a little bit of it. So, anyway, okay, so Marjorie Green's chapter, which has a great deal to speak into our discussion of English, is sufficiently self-contained. That means you do not need to read the whole book to understand that chapter. The chapter stands alone. It can be read by itself, or it can be read as an introduction, an opening to the book. You could go to chapter 6 and begin there and read and have no problem. In fact, I think that's a good idea, to tell you the truth. But anyway. So it could be read as an opening into the book. And one could reasonably send one's students directly to it, which means you don't have to teach it first before they can appreciate and understand it. It's simple enough, direct, and accessible. Right? It seems to me that no philosopher could seriously disturb my ad hoc judgment that the book is a very fine piece of work. Okay, so he's saying ad hoc, I believe, means in this specific case. And in this specific, to this specific argument This is an amazingly good piece of work. No philosopher will ever contradict that statement. It is a very fine piece of work. Wide-ranging, pregnant. Pregnant means rich in significance in this context. With many thoughts can come from it. Okay? Pregnant and closely knit. Unsurpassable. In fact, for my purpose.
There's a question here, Margarita.
Question?
Yeah. So, fine piece of work, wide-ranging, pregnant, and closely knit. What does closely knit mean in this context?
The question is, what does closely knit mean in this context? You know, I thought about that for quite a while at home when I was preparing, and I found it difficult to come up with the answer. I know that knit literally means, you know, knitting, where you create fabric with needles and yarn, and you weave yarn into yarn, and it forms interlocking stitches that form a fabric or a cloth that you can make clothing out of. I wonder if maybe when she says that the book is wide-ranging, it means it has lots of breadth, lots of ideas from one side of an argument to another. So that's lots of threads, potentially. Pregnant also suggests a multiplicity of ideas can spin off of the material in the chapter. So closely knit might mean that she deals with all of these ideas very technically so that they work together and form the fabric of one argument. That is a guess. That's what I think it means. That's what it suggests to me as a native-speaking reader. Okay. So, unsurpassable, in fact, for my purpose. And what is Levis's purpose? Levis's purpose is to help students understand the need for higher order thinking, the need for careful and correct use of a broad use of language, rich in subtle significance. And somehow this has all become inextricable with this philosophical idea that facts and values are divorced. So maybe he'll bring that all together in a few paragraphs. Okay, to offer to summarize even the given chapter means the specific chapter in question, the one we're talking about, this given chapter, would be absurd. I shall merely make such use of the book here as may facilitate the argument I am committed to. So to make such use of the book is he will draw from the ideas, especially of this chapter, freely as long as these ideas are supporting the arguments he is trying to make, that he is committed to. I discovered it meaning the book itself, I discovered it, never having seen or heard it recommended, when poking around the philosophy shelves in the Petty Curry bookshop, now demolished. Poking around. Poking around is an idiom. It suggests not a very thorough and diligent search. Just he happened to walk into a bookstore because he had time. He was looking around, take one book here, one book there, just randomly looking. This is poke. If I put my finger in your stomach, I'm poking you. So to poke around is just to look here, look there, not systematic, not a search, just looking. And then he found it. He had never heard of it. It was never recommended to him. He was poking around this bookshop, which is now demolished. Impressed, on a sampling glance or two, by the quality of the writing and by the brief introduction, I read more carefully here and there, and without hesitation bought the book. Impressed is positive, usually. It means I'm somewhat surprised and feel very good about what I am seeing. So he was favorably impressed. He got a good impression of this book by a sampling glance or two. A sampling means you read a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there, a little bit there. That's taking a sampling. And glance means a quick look. It's fast. It's just a sampling glance. So he went like this. Oh, look at this book. That's a sampling glance or two. Okay? Impressed, on a sampling glance or two, by the quality of the writing, so he thought Marjorie Green was an expert wordsmith, a writer who wrote well, and by the brief introduction. Either he liked the whole introduction, or maybe he liked the fact that it was brief. It's not clear. That's ambiguous. Maybe he doesn't like long introductions. I don't know. But he was favorably impressed by the quality of the writing and maybe the brevity of the introduction, or maybe he just liked the introduction. I read more carefully here and there. So now he's not glancing anymore. Now he's actually reading. But still choosing small portions. And without hesitation bought the book. Without hesitation means he did not think, oh no, maybe it's not worth the money. He was sure. Yes, it is worth it, I will buy it. And he bought it. It should, I think, it being the book itself again, it should, I think, be recognized to be by the criteria implicit in my theme, which is the nature of our urgent need of a genuine educated class, an essential, standby, and a classic. So, where's the core of the sentence? The core of the sentence is, it should be recognized to be an essential, standby, and a classic. It should be recognized to be an essential, standby, and a classic.
What's a standby?
Standby. A standby is a commodity that you use all the time. So in the kitchen, a standby is flour and salt and eggs. We always can recourse to the flour and the salt and the eggs and bread and butter. These are standbys. They are always there, standing by to fill a purpose. They're always there. So this book should be a standby, means it should be on every student's shelf, according to Levis. He really likes this book. That's why I bought it, by the way. It should be an essential, standby, and a classic. Now let's look at what's in the little intervenings. It should, I think, be an essential standby. I think means he inserts the I think because he wants you to know this is his opinion and nobody else agrees with it necessarily. He thinks this. It's his opinion. Okay? It should, I think, be recognized to be, okay, by the criteria implicit in my theme. Okay, so it's not an essential standby for everybody, for all English students, all philosophy students or something. It's from the narrow perspective of English as a discipline of thought. It should be an essential standby in a classic. Okay, and also implicit in my theme. What is his theme? His theme is the nature of our urgent need of a genuine, educated class. Okay, so this gives us an insight into the essential theme of this entire book, English as a Living Principle. Levis, the heart of his theme is our urgent need of a genuine, educated class. What do you have in Brazil? Do you have a mass of people who are not really educated? In America, we are moving in the direction of universal ignorance and universal stuntedness. People who cannot think. They don't know anything and they cannot think. We are moving in that direction with the masses of people. There is a need of a genuine educated class. In America, we used to have that, and still do to a certain extent. Levis is working toward that need. So, from the standpoint of the need of a genuine educated class of people who know how to think, this book by Marjorie Green, especially Chapter 6, should be an essential standby and a classic. By the way, when I went over this portion with Olavo, he pointed out to me that the need for a genuine educated class is the heart of his vocation, and his project is attempting to meet that need in Brazil. He identified strongly with this, and this is why Levis, Olavo likes this so much. Okay, do you want to go on to the rest of it? Continue, Alessandro?
Well, we can take a break and then we'll go on.
Okay, let's take a break. If you have any questions, go ahead and send them on, and we'll be back to you very soon. Hello, we're back. There's one question, I think. Alessandro's getting it.
So, there's a question about Marjorie Green's book.
Mm-hmm.
The student asks if her style is like Levis's, or is it easier to read it? If you could read us a paragraph.
The question is Marjorie Green's style like Levis? Difficult. And could I read a little bit from it? Yes, I thought about reading some from it. Personally, I think it is like Levis. I think it is difficult. It assumes that you know a lot about logic, about the terminology of philosophy and of logic. So it is really for philosophy students who are serious, but I'll read you some. Okay, let's see. See if you can get anything out of this. All right, hold on. I'm picking up in the middle. Yeah. I think it's going to be hard, but I'll read you a little. Okay, we are picking up in the middle, so you won't understand what this direction means, but I'll read it. It is not from this direction that I want to attack the fact-value dichotomy. I shall argue, on the contrary, that our judgment of fact depends on constitutive judgment of value. So our judgment of fact depends on our judgment of value, not the other way around. Okay, the other way around being our judgment of value depends on our judgment of fact. Okay. Indeed, what was true in the assertion of the duality of facts and values was the insight that values cannot be elicited from bare facts. The fact that a person called Beethoven on such and such a date wrote such and such a mark on paper does not by itself account for the existence of the eroica as a musical composition. The fact that millions of Jews and East Europeans died in gas chambers does not in itself make the evil of the Nazi terror. But conversely, the genius of Beethoven made possible the composition of the eroica, and the evil of Nazism made possible the mass annihilation of the gas chamber. So you see that the value preceded the action. Only by an evaluation do we call the eroica music, not noise, and so assimilate the fact of its composition to the history of music rather than to acoustics. Only by an evaluation do we call the story of Auschwitz or Belsen mass murder, and so assimilate it into human history rather than to chemistry or population genetics. So she's showing how values are intrinsic to understanding the facts. What do you think about the difficulty of this writing? We'll wait for you to respond. Give us a couple seconds. Any of you who would like to weigh in on whether you think Levis is more difficult or less difficult or equal to Marjorie Green.
We just got an email. A student says, it seems that Green's style is not as difficult as Levis.
So one student says Green is not as difficult as Levis. That's good. Yeah, I would actually like to study this chapter. Maybe I'll mention it to Olavo and see if he likes it. Maybe we could do part of it. Any other thoughts or questions?
Not yet. Another one.
Here comes one.
Yeah, another one. Another student now on chat says that it's difficult. Marjorie Green's style is difficult, but I managed to understand it.
So another student said that Marjorie Green's style was difficult, but he did manage to understand it.
And he adds that it's easier than Levis.
Easier than Levis. Yeah. I actually like it myself better than Levis. Not really, but yeah. It's easier for me too.
Another student says Levis's style is more difficult.
A third student agrees Levis's style is more difficult. By the way, we are going to have to give you more pages of the book if we are to continue with the Levis book. And I think Olavo wants us to continue. Okay, looks like that's it. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.